We are now live. Okay, welcome everybody. It is Wednesday, so this is our Wine and Whatever Wednesday. I am Kristen. I am the wine club manager at Papa Pietro Perry Winery, and I have got John Finger with me, who is CEO, owner, founder, all things Hog Island Oyster. So welcome, John.
Hey everybody.
Hello. I'm thrilled. I'm absolutely thrilled you can be here. And then let's see, we've got our Rosé. So we released our 2020 Rosé of Pinot Noir. We released that last week, pretty much. It went early to Wine Club, but last week we released it. So we brought John over a couple of bottles. Well, yeah, you got to go in the middle. There you go. We brought John over a couple of bottles. I've got a couple of bottles. We're pouring it today because we always have a Rosé and Oyster event at the winery. We can't have it this year, clearly. So I personally went down to Hog Island. I had my own Rosé and Oyster event. Left Rosé so John can have his Rosé and Oyster. And now we're doing it again because I'll show a little quick glimpse of my, there's my setup right there. That's all for me. It's all for me.
I've got mine just started here. Just got one open so far and some lemons ready to go.
Oh, you open as you go?
Yeah.
Oh, that's smart.
I can talk and shuck oysters. It's a little.
How many oysters can you shuck?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not as good as I used to be, but it's back in the day I was in a few contests where you shuck 24 oysters in under 2 minutes, something like that. So.
Your gentleman who I got all the oysters from told me you have to shuck 300 oysters an hour in order to work for you, in order to be out shucking.
Yeah, to be out and doing events, that's about the rate you have to go at. So
I'm going to keep my job. You will not hire me. I'm about one every couple minutes.
Yeah.
I can open 300 bottles of wine an hour, though. I'll tell you that much.
Okay.
We could be a good team. Anyway, so I've got the Sweetwater oysters. There are multiple different kinds of oysters, but Ben Papa Pietro, our winemaker's on if we have any questions. Thank you. Thank you, Ben. We got Sweetwaters. What are Sweetwaters?
So Sweetwaters is our name for our Pacific oyster. So the Pacific oyster is what everybody on the West Coast grows. It originally was brought over here in the 1920s, so 100 years ago from Japan. And it's actually a very fast-growing, hardy oyster. It's grown in Western Europe now, in South Africa, and Japan and China, Australia, New Zealand is very popular oyster. And then the Sweetwater is our name for our version of that oyster.
So you'll never find another company that does Sweetwaters. Yeah,
there's actually a Sweetwater oyster company we've found out. We tried to trademark so Hog Island is a trademark name. Sweetwater, we weren't able to trademark because there was a Sweetwater prawn company. And then since then there's been a Sweetwater oyster company. But you really want to look for the name Hog Island, then it's our oyster. So. And
if you've been and Hog Island is amazing. So obviously you have one out in Tomales Bay. You've got Tony's Seafood, the restaurant, your restaurant down the street. You have a location in Napa in Oxbow.
Yeah.
Ferry Building.
Right. And then our newest one is, and then we were ready to open it a week before the shutdown, was in Larkspur Landing in Larkspur. And that's actually doing very well. So that's our fifth location. So
very cool. And I have been to all of them except for Larkspur. So I'm going to have to add that to my list because you do an amazing clam chowder too. Not that I digressed. But okay, so Sweetwaters. And how many different oysters do you grow? Is that the right word?
We grow mainly the Sweetwater. Yep. Yeah. And because we're farming them. And so we also grow the Eastern or Atlantic oyster. A lot of people, we're one of the few farms out here that grows that oyster. It used to be grown back in the late 1800s in California. And then we restarted that when I started the company in the 1980s. We grow some Kumamotos, which is another little Japanese species that doesn't grow as fast, doesn't get as big. We grow a few of the European flat oyster, which we call French hogs. In France, they call them Bellon, but we can't call them Bellon. It's like calling our sparkling wine champagne. The French get very upset about that. So.
Oh, interesting.
And then we grow a new project we're starting is the Olympia oyster, which is the native West Coast oyster, which is a very small, like this big flat oyster. So that's all the varieties we grow right now. So.
Okay. And there's different kinds of oysters and different kinds of oysters for different styles of eating, cooking raw, right?
Yeah, so the Pacific oyster will grow large if you let it. Traditionally, when I started the business, people didn't eat West Coast oysters raw in the half shell because the growing methods back in the day for West Coast oysters were they grew them in clusters, and by the time they would be able to break apart in singles, they were this big. So those oysters weren't suitable for half shell. So the prevailing wisdom was, if you want a good oyster eating raw in a half shell, you have to get oysters from the East Coast. We were one of the first farms that adopted French and European techniques to grow little single little oysters, and then we grow them, and we can manipulate them and slow them down a little bit so you can produce a nice, what we call extra small size oyster for on the half shell. So all those varieties that I mentioned are good for eating raw in the half shell, but the Pacifics, as they get bigger, are really the best of the cooking oysters because they're full bodied, they don't shrink up as much. So
okay. And have you ever found a pearl?
I have one. Oh, I got to turn the right way. There it is.
Well done.
Actually, somebody gave me that one. I have found some pearls. Our oysters, when they produce pearls, are a little bit chalkier. They're not quite the quality you would expect from South Sea pearls. But
you can make it up. We'll never know. It's totally fine.
I tell people we have all the mineral rights. So if you find a pearl in one of our oysters, you have to give it back to me anyhow.
Oh, if we tell you.
That's never worked. Yeah. So
it's never worked. There are some places you can go, and if you find a diamond or something, that diamond's yours. The key, not quite the same with you guys. Well, cheers on the rosé. I was John's at the farm, so he was saying he doesn't have stemware. He's
this is what we drink wine in at the farm here. So it's the little tumbler.
It still works. What do you think of the rosé?
I love it. I mean, we were talking earlier. I love this sort of French style rosé, this light, high acid rosé. I mean, that's what works with oysters, especially with raw oysters. It's a nice acidity that really goes with the oysters. So
it does. And you guys do a mignette. We did a rosé mignette on our perfectly paired last week, and the mignette's got that little vinegar with a little of the lemon and the salinity with the oyster, and the rosé is young creamy. I think we're 7 minutes in, so I think we have to have an oyster.
Okay.
At this point. So,
I'm ready.
Is there a proper way? Don shucks as he goes, is what I learned. I'm pre-shucked over here. I shucked most of them, and I have all my fingers still. I'm good.
I can give a quick. You want me to give a quick shucking lesson? Yes. You want to do that? Okay.
Since you didn't already shuck them, yes.
Yeah. So can everybody see that? Okay.
I can.
See the platter. So the right tool is the perfect thing. You want something that's got a point and a stiff blade because you're gonna be doing some prying. I do this with a glove up in the air. I'm going to see if I can move this out of the way here. Can everybody see that? The best way to do this at home, for some reason I'm being dyslexic on where the oyster goes here. Let me do that.
Image.
So every oyster has a cup side and a flat side. So you want to have the cup side down, and then there's a pointed end and a rounded end. So the pointed end has a hinge right here, ligament here, and if you're looking down at the oyster, 2/3 of the way on the right about there is a muscle. So those are the two places, right? And I tell people to do it down on the surface and use a wadded up towel, right? And I'm going to try to do this here, like this. So I do it with the glove. But if
tell you that's how you use the glove.
Yeah, I don't use the glove this way. I'm just showing people this.
Okay.
There we go. So you can see that if the plane of the hinge is like this, I'm going to be down into it a little bit. And what you're going to do in a way is you're working the knife in. You're just at the same time you're wiggling back and forth, and you'll feel it go through the hinge. You'll feel it pop. See now it's in there, and sometimes the knife might go in all the way. If it forces in all the way, like pushes all the way in, you want to pull it back so just the tip is engaged. Otherwise, you make the oyster look like a scrambled egg. So at this point, you can pick the oyster up and start prying back and forth, and you pop that ligament. Did you see that?
I did.
And I'm gonna pry up and give myself a little space, and then like you're filleting a fish, I'm gonna keep the knife against the top shell like you're going against the bone of the fish, and I'm gonna reach across to where that muscle is and cut that muscle. And the idea is you've not left anything on the top shell, right? And you haven't gone into here or cut this meat up to make it look like scrambled eggs. So at this point in time, you're going to take any shell chips out that you see, because there might be a little bit of shell in there. And here's that muscle right here.
Okay.
So now you're going to slide the knife underneath it and loosen it. So now it's all loose. Make sure you got any shell bits out and it's all ready to go. So.
What is the water in there?
That's called liquor. That's called seawater. That's liquor. That's how the oyster is keeping itself alive when it's out of the water. So that's a sign of a good fresh oyster.
Okay.
The French actually do this thing so where they actually pour that liquor out, because the oyster will regenerate that liquor if it's alive and still fresh, and that's a good sign if it's fresh. But either way, you want to make sure there's that liquor in there. That's part of the flavor, that the brininess of the place it comes from, right?
Okay, so you're supposed to drink that.
Yeah, I poured a little bit of it out. Like here, I still have some in there, but I poured some out. At different times of the year, there's more or less in there, depending on how plump the oyster is. So, and then I tell people that the way to do this without an oyster fork, if you want it, is you want to hold it with you want to hold it with your thumb and middle finger, and leave your index finger free to help push the meat out.
No one ever taught me this. Oops. I've got a couple of shells in mine.
Yeah.
I'm not a good checker. That's delicious. Oh, hold on.
Really following it, that wine is great.
Why is it great with the wine?
That is great. Dan's asked me, why is it great with wine? It is great because that salinity, we still have it, but the this rosé is it's got that nice dryness to it. It's got a little bit, you still get that little watermelon and strawberry coming through. I'm just supposed to do wine, oyster, wine.
Well, yeah, it is. And it's funny because I was going to bring it today and I forgot. There's a great Ernest Hemingway quote out of the little book called Movable Feast, where he's eating oysters outside at a cafe in Paris and talking about the salinity of the oysters and the bracy brininess of the oysters and the acidity of the wine, the brightness, the way it's like, you don't want a wine that has this long, lingering finish. It's about this cleansing kind of feel, and then you're ready to have another oyster. It's yeah.
But I actually am ready to have another oyster. I was hoping that story was longer. Because I'm going to do rose. We do wine, cheese, wine. I'm going to do rosé, oyster, rosé. That is awesome. All right, so Ron in Breezy, New Jersey, is it still true oysters shouldn't be eaten during certain months of the year?
So that has to do, back in the day, you used to say don't eat oysters in the months without R. If you think about it, the months without R are your summer months, right? Mm-hmm. And the reason that was for various reasons. One, back in the day when oysters were fished and not farmed, that's when they were getting ready to reproduce and create eggs and sperm and the young for the next year. So you didn't want to be, taking them out right at what you'd be jeopardizing future crops. But more importantly, you had warmer water temperatures and warmer air temperatures and no good refrigeration. So your risk, and you're eating raw animal protein. So all those things together led to the fact, hey, it's best just not to eat them. And then also in areas where the oysters spawn naturally, after they spawn, they go from being very fat and plump to being very thin and watery and not a lot of flavor other than the salt water. So fast forward to today, when we're farming them, we have a hatchery in Humboldt Bay where we actually produce our seed. And so the oysters out here might change over the course of the year, but they don't do that whole spawning thing and get thin and watery and all that. So, and we have 4 different areas in the bay here we grow oysters, and they cycle differently. So we can always find oysters that are in good shape. And we have, at our farm here anyhow, if you've been out here, we have a whole filtered seawater system, and the seawater is chilled. So we're keeping things cold because the moment they come out of the water. So it does get harder to find good quality oysters in the summer because in different areas you have the oysters cycling through the reproduction, but it's not impossible.
Okay, and there's multiple different ways to eat oysters, right?
Yeah, we actually, back in the day when we first started, we almost had 2 markets. We had a wintertime market, which was for oysters for raw on the half shell, when they're at their peak. And in the summertime, we sold a lot of bigger oysters for barbecuing because they were fatter, maybe a little bit softer in texture, but for cooking, that was just fine. So. And
my first couple oysters. Are you on 2 different screens there?
Me?
Yeah, somehow I'm echoing. Oh, I don't like hearing myself once, much less twice. But
I heard you a little while ago. Yeah, I'm on 1.
All right, no worries. I think I'm on 1 too. I grew up first learning oysters with a saltine cracker and cocktail sauce. Wow. I've graduated to mignettes, which are multiple different kinds, right? And you guys do a mignette called hogwash.
Yeah.
Clearly. which is just like a vinegar base with some herbs and shallots and.
Yeah, it's a top secret recipe. The recipe is on the website. So it's actually a rice vinegar. It's a rice vinegar, cilantro, shallot based one. It goes really good with our oysters. I mean, sometimes it's really interesting because people ask me the difference. Some of the East Coast oysters, I don't think it goes as well with. I think the some of the Eastern oysters, it's the classic French one, which is kind of probably what you did with the shallots and maybe some white wine and champagne vinegar and cracked black pepper. You know, the oysters have different flavor characteristics, so it's you want to match your mignonette with your oyster as well. So
we did our chef Jim May, who's amazing, did a rosé vignette, which is the rosé, a little red wine vinegar, a little rice vinegar, shallots, and yes, a touch of black pepper. So that must be the and that's this one here, right? See, it's obviously it's pink.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll pour it out, but they're both great. That one's got rosé in it, which I prefer the rosé in my glass. So your background is a marine biologist.
Yep.
Then you decided to go into oyster farming because.
So I grew up on the East Coast. I grew up on the East End, Long Island, New York, and grew up fishing and clamming and hunting, and went to school for marine biology. Worked in restaurants. I was always into food. My family grew our own vegetables growing up. I worked as a cook in a restaurant through college, and I wanted to marry the two. I wanted to marry my love for marine biology, my love of food. Funny thing is that oysters were the only seafood I didn't eat growing up. I wanted to raise fish. I wanted to get into farming trout or striped bass, and I had been to California for a semester of school. Decided being a surfer would be a fun place to live for a couple of years. Came out here, started knocking on doors, and the first job was for an oyster company, and I wound up falling in love with the business because of the environmental piece of it. I mean, oysters really are more about place than any other food. You really have to have a healthy, well-functioning bay to be able to grow really good oysters, and that's what I fell in love with, and here we are all these years later. So
very cool. And Hog Island has been around since
1983. So
you started when you were 4. You were telling me that early.
Yeah.
I was worried about the child labor laws. I didn't really want to bring that up. And oysters. What?
Yeah, and we always thought the restaurant thing or direct to consumer would be a small part of what we do, but now it's become a really big part of who we are. So we still have the farm here where we grow. We produce about 3 million oysters a year here in Tomales Bay. When I was there Monday, you guys do crab as well, right? Yes. Mm-hmm.
The gentleman who was helping me. You did 1,000 pounds of crab last weekend.
Yes, exactly. We buy a lot of fish and crab from local fishermen. Now that we have our own restaurants, we can deal directly with the source. And we buy other oysters too from other farms up in the Pacific Northwest, and we buy those directly from those farms, not through anybody else. It's places I've been to, and we actually we have another facility in a Humboldt Bay where we grow seed oysters, baby oysters, and we sell that seed to a lot of farms in Washington State as well as our own farm, and then we purchase back those oysters when they're market size, so kind of closing the whole loop. So we're going soup to nuts now, so from the seed all the way through.
Soup to nuts, I like that. And so clearly I grew up in Florida. Florida does, there are East Coast oysters as well. I know Louisiana has oysters, so I was at a restaurant once and they had this little oyster sampler where you could do East Coast and West Coast and really delve into try the differences. Talking to you, obviously oysters are anywhere pretty much where there's a coast. The winery did a cruise a few years ago, Australia and New Zealand, and Simone, my work wife, and I visited an oyster farm in Australia, which was the first time I ever really delved into oysters and learned oysters. But they're very similar to wine with terroir, right? And sorting and all these aspects. So what about what did you call it? Marine war?
Miroir, yeah. So we talk a lot about it, that it's first, people say, well, how do I know I had an oyster? How do I know if I'm somewhere else and I order an oyster that I'm going to like because I like this oyster? So the two biggest things to remember, and it's a lot like wine again, is first and foremost is the varietal, right? Like, is it a Pacific oyster? Is it an Eastern oyster? Is it a Kumamoto? Because oysters are going to select for different microscopic algae, which is what they eat. They don't all eat the same types. Some guys like more red, some guys like more greens, and then they uptake minerals differently at different rates. So some taste more minerally, some less, And then beyond that is just like terroir. Is each bay, even though it might taste as salty, that mineral component in a bay is different, right? Depending on the land around it. So we call that terroir, just like you guys would call it terroir for wine. So if you remember the variety and the place, that's going to have the biggest impact on the flavor. And then, so I guess a lot like wine, how we decide to grow them. Are they off bottom? Do we slow them down? We do things sometimes a lot like wine again to make the oysters grow slower, which tends to, it's like stressing vines, right? If the vines get slightly stressed, sometimes that adds quality or nuances to the grape and to the wine.
Characteristics,
it's very similar with the oysters. I can grow a Pacific oyster here in Tomales Bay, probably this big in 9 months, but the shell quality isn't good. You can break that shell in half with your hands, and the meat quality isn't what we want. So we actually, for an oyster this size and extra small, we like them to be at least a year old. That's when they become what we want to see in a Hog Island Sweetwater. So we have them being tumbled sometimes in the tide with flotation. We have them out of the water a certain amount of time every day between the tides on purpose, so we slow them down.
There's a lot that goes into this. So it's fascinating to me. Ron is saying there's a restaurant in Portland, Maine, my bad, specializes East and West Coast oysters, Eventide. I think that's fun to try those. Jim's having fresh Northwest oysters tonight. Craig's on, Sean's on. This is actually fun. Who else is eating oysters, which is, but no, I love all the differences. And tell me about the hats in the background.
Oh, the hats, those are all the oyster farms I've either visited or oyster farmers have visited me. It's a great community. I mean, some of my best friends are people I've met through this business. Like I said, we buy a lot of oysters from other farms as well to have a variety at our restaurants, and it's just a great relationship. It's people who are, and it's great to be able to go visit them because, like I said, a lot of times these bays are beautiful places that we get to work in. I mean, we used to have a saying, back in the day when I was out on the tide and the boats every day with the guys, because you're working really quickly because you have 3 hours of a low tide and you got your head down and you're working, and we'd go, stop, look where you work. And for like 10 or 15 seconds, just look around, look at how the beauty, and okay, get back to work, because it just, I feel really lucky to be able to do what I do. So.
And you fell into oysters. So you were a marine biologist, and then you decided to delve into the oyster world, and you have a partner. Yep. Right. And we have shareholders as well. We've done a few rounds of investment over the years as we've done these restaurants, and there are a lot of friends and family. A lot of friends of ours from the wine business have been investors over the year, and because again, there's a lot of similarities. So. And where does the name Hog Island come from?
So there is an island in the north end of the bay here that was very close to our first 5 acres. We have 160 acres now that we farm on, and when we started, we wanted a name that people would remember. We didn't want to just say Tomales Oysters or Point Reyes Oysters. So we hit on this name. Let's call it Hog Island Oysters. And the funny thing is I was working part-time for my buddy who was our distributor back then when we distributed to restaurants all around the country. And I'd be talking to some of these older, crusty wholesalers, down at Fisherman's Wharf, and they're going, oh, that's a horrible name. People think about pigs and dirt and shit, blah, blah, blah. And now it's, it's a trademark name, widely cultured. The funny thing is the story we heard is that it was called Hog Island because a ship got wrecked there and some pigs got loose for a day or a week or a year, depending on the story. And come to find out that there are hog islands in many bays in this country because settlers would use islands for pigs to corral, to drop the pigs off, and then they could go back and easily find them. There's a hog island in Maine. There's one in Rhode Island. There's one in Virginia. And we've bumped up against that a few times because sometimes people we've never been able to produce enough oysters to meet all the demand. And so people sometimes can't get our oysters, and somebody tries to call their oysters Hog Island, and we have to stop them because we have the trademark. So it's been an interesting issue, but.
Well done trademarking then. Yeah. Do you ship oysters?
Yes, we do. We used to sell through distributors to wholesalers all around the country, but now we have our own restaurants. We just handpick restaurants we sell to, but we weren't doing very much mail order before the pandemic hit. It was something I felt we didn't need to do, and I didn't want to ship boxes around if we didn't have to, but how it goes, one of those pivots. So we we did almost $1 million in mail order shipments this past year. And now that's part of our future. So we ship Monday through Thursday all over the country. We ship our oysters. We ship some of the crab and the fish. We ship meal kits. We ship our chowder meal kit if you want to do your chowder at home.
We do have meal kits.
Yeah.
I think we should do a Papa Pietro Perry Hog Island virtual rosé and oyster whatnot. That could be fun to team up. We do. You are absolutely correct. Since the pandemic hit, you have to pivot. You have to reinvent. What are we going to do? This is amazing, and we've teamed up with like some creameries and some chocolate, and we're doing Liberty Ducks going around the country. And the beauty is, it's so much less expensive because people don't have to travel, and we'll come into your home on your big old screen TV, and it's amazing.
The support has been amazing. It's really been fun to see, and we have a subscription box where you can get a different oyster each month. 3 dozen of them, and we talk about that oyster, and they're from around the country, the farms that we buy from, as well as our own farm. So it's a fun thing. So.
This is fun. Okay, good question. Are your waters owned, leased? Anybody? What's the deal with the water?
So they're leased. So most states, and this isn't all around true around the country, everything below the high tide mark is what's called public trust land. So in California, that's true almost everywhere, but not up in Humboldt Bay. Actually, we're leasing some land from a private landowner. But so we're leasing through California Fish and Game. Washington State actually is different. There are some state tide lands. There are a lot of privately owned tide lands up there that either run with the land up above, or they actually have land that was set aside for shellfish farming between the high tide and low tide mark. But most states, you're leasing through some state agency.
Okay, so you have to lease. So you lease, and how much land do you lease? So you lease the ground part.
Well, you're leasing what are called water bottom rights and water column. So different states are different. So my nephew is growing oysters in North Carolina, and there are leases where you can grow oysters on the bottom. And then there are leases where you can get what are called water column leases, where you can be up in the water column, or you can get permits. Our leases here, if you're leasing 5 acres, you can get permits to grow either on bottom or off bottom, or deep water or shallow water, or all those kinds of things. And we have right now 160 acres that we lease. And we're using about 30 acres of that currently, and we have permits to double that, to use up to about 60 acres of that. So,
wow! And can you over farm a certain area?
You can. I mean, it's really difficult in this country because there are so many competing uses when you're trying to get permits. We call it kind of there's a term called carrying capacity. If you have too many oysters in an area, they're stripping all the food out. Okay. And there's biological carrying capacity. That's almost impossible to overcome in this country because, for instance, in Tamales Bay here, all of us together, the 6 companies, lease about 550 acres, which is about 5% of the surface area of the bay. You will never hit biological carrying capacity, right? Okay. But there are areas in Japan and even areas in France where food is king, where a bay, I've seen a bay just carpeted with oyster culture gear. And now they're dealing with that. And now they're dealing with the fact that the quality of the oysters have gone down and are having to pull back a little bit. But anywhere in California, certainly, and anywhere in the United States, we are nowhere near biological carrying capacity. So we kind of talk about social carrying capacity. The neighbors not want to see buoys. There's boating access. There's fishery wants to operate here. So we'd like, at one point in time, back before I was here, there was twice as much acreage under lease in Tamales Bay. There was 1,100 acres under lease. I'd like to see us get back to something approaching that in this bay. I'd like to see some new people, some younger people get involved in the business, for it's very costly to do the permitting right now.
And do sea otters, seals, do you have, is your competition some of the sea predators?
Not so much in terms of how we grow them now. Back in the day when they would grow the oysters loose on the bottom, they had to worry about rock crabs, or more importantly, if people know what, you got people from around the country, so not everybody has this problem, but we have a stingray here called bat rays. And bat rays are fairly docile, but they get to be over 100 pounds, and they have crushing molar teeth, and they can suck up oysters that are loose on the bottom and crush them up and suck out the meat and spit out the shell. So back in the day, they would try to fence off areas of the bay with willow poles. You can still see remnants of some of the old fences. But we're growing everything in some sort of heavy-duty mesh container that the bat rays can't get into and the red rock crabs can't get into. So we don't really have to worry too much about predators right now. It's more about avoiding certain areas. So we have to avoid seal haul-out sites. We have to avoid areas that have a lot of eelgrass, which is a resource for herring spawning on, things like that. It's more about biological issues and resource issues.
There's lots of little things that the layperson does not even understand that goes into. Oh, yeah. Okay, so on my list, what is FLUPSI?
What is a FLUPSI? A FLUPSI is an acronym for a floating upwell system. So I think if you go on our website, if you poke around into Humboldt, our Humboldt facility, it's a way of growing oyster seed that's really efficient. So oyster culture is all about water flow, because oysters are filter feeders. So the more water you have going by them, the more oxygen and the more food is going by them, the more growth you can get and the more oysters you can grow in a given area. So a FLUPSI is a big raft, essentially, that has a big paddle wheel at one end. And we have these bins or containers that fit down into the water that have mesh on the bottom. And the FLUPSI pulls the water out of one end and the water upwells up through these bins. And we can grow seed up to 3 feet thick on there because it fluidizes the seed. It's really...
And what is seed? So oysters are alive, so I'm not understanding seed, because it's not like...
We call it seed or spat. So oysters start off life as free-swimming microscopic larvae. So oysters, when they're getting ready to spawn, release sperm and eggs out into the water column. The males usually release the sperm first, and then the females react to that. Funny, there's...
Similar to a lard. Keep going.
Yeah, so, anyhow, and then the larvae are formed, and they're microscopic, much like the food they're eventually going to eat. Free swimming, just floating around in the water for 10 days to 2 weeks, and after that period of time, they fall out of the water column and they lose the ability to swim, and they cement themselves as something and start forming shells out of the minerals of the seawater, usually the calcium carbonate, right? Okay. And from that point on, they don't move. And from that point on, we call them spat or seed. So they look just like a full-grown oyster, but they're only a half a millimeter in size. And so the basic way of farming oysters, because in Mother Nature, it's a real hit-or-miss proposition, because currents might carry them away. There's no suitable hard substrate for them to fall out in. They might fall out where there's muddy and they just get buried or silted in. So the basic way of farming oysters was to put more shell out at the right time of year for them to settle on. That can still be a hit or miss, and now we do that all in hatcheries. So we have a hatchery in Humboldt Bay. We warm up the seawater. We feed the adult oysters food to make them fat and happy, and they put energy into reproduction. We turn down the lights. We put a little Barry White music on, and
clearly
we get them to do their thing. And now we produce a seed on land in a building. And
you're running the sex shop for oysters.
No, don't tell anybody. So it's just
nobody's hearing us. It's fine.
Yeah.
Is seed visible to the eye?
It is once they form that first shell. It's almost like a grain of pepper. You can see it, and it's really hard to see, but they're there. You can see them, and then we're handling them on land in a way that we're improving on the survivorship. A lot of what we do is really just improving on Mother Nature, what they do, but we're trying to increase the odds. So in Mother Nature, less than 0.1% make that transition, and we're trying to hope to get that to 20%.
Oh, you're giving them a fighting chance.
Yes, exactly.
I like that. Okay, what is a certification B corporation?
So Hog Island is a certified B corporation, which is a movement started, I want to say it might be as much as 20 years ago. B is short for benefit. And it was the idea that corporations, it shouldn't be about business being bad and the environment being good or communities. It really is that businesses can be a force for good. And so we joined as a way of saying, hey, it's been in our DNA that the environment is important to us. We've been involved in a lot of environmental efforts to safeguard the health of this bay. We care about our communities. We care about our employees. We have a lot of long-term employees. We've provided 100% of health care for anybody who works 20 hours or more in this company for years, because I felt it was the right thing to do. So we wanted to join this movement to say, hey, there's a right way to do business. and business isn't over here. It's part of the solution. And we actually are now what's called and there's, I think, 33 states now in the country that you can choose to be what's called the California Benefit Corporation. We are a legal benefit corporation, which means it's not just about return to shareholders, it's about return to stakeholders, which is our communities, our employees, our shareholders, and our environment. So we kind of decided to put our money where our mouth is.
All
right. Congrats. That's amazing. That's you guys give a phenomenal product. You're a great company. I've had nothing been good with you guys. Like I've said, you've come out to the winery a few times and done our stuff, and you have a phenomenal name. You've done very well with you guys. You know Hog Island is quality. You know you're going to get a good thing. So I am beyond thrilled you joined us. I'm beyond thrilled I get to eat oysters in a few minutes. And it is, unfortunately, time to wrap it up. It is half an hour. But, John, you can stay on for a few minutes and I say goodbye. But we've got wine chocolate cheese tomorrow. Oh, there goes my landline, who nobody else ever has anything.
Yeah.
White chocolate cheese. I know it's a telemarketer.
What's that?
99. Pretty sure. White chocolate cheese. We got virtual bingo. We got Liberty Ducks coming up. John, we're gonna work with you guys. If you guys will work with us, I think this would be.
It'd be fun to do some more things.
Yeah, I think this is gonna be super fun because we didn't get to the Pinot because we're drinking rosé, but the rosé and the oysters has been amazing and great. And again, I'm thrilled. Everybody for joining us again. You guys are fantastic. Thank you. I love these Wine and Whatever Wednesdays. I enjoy. But John, again, thank you. Cheers to you. And what a great company that that you
guys do. This is how we all get through this, right?
What isn't it? Oh, isn't that the truth? Now I'm adding oysters to the mix, and now I know how to shuck them. I did shuck these. But anyways, cheers, everybody. Thank you guys for joining us. John, thank you. This was